Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rupal Parekh. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Social Work. I'm also one of the community engagement coordinators here at UConn TAB, which is the Technical Assistance for Brownfields EPA Region 1.
And hi everyone, my name is Katie Malgioglio. I got my master's in social work from the University of Connecticut, and now I am the UConn TAB community liaison and one of the community engagement coordinators.
So welcome everyone to today's webinar on community engagement and EPA MAC grants. Thank you so much for joining us. Our goal today is to help everyone here feel more comfortable writing about, talking about, and practicing community engagement in your communities, specifically in the context of Brownfields grants and the Brownfields redevelopment process. In today's webinar, we're doing a brief overview of MAC grants, discussing meaningful community engagement and how this practice benefits communities, and going over the grant writing guidelines. More specifically, we'll look at section 2 of the narrative, which goes over community need and community engagement, considerations for assessment and cleanup grants, and some of our own resources at TAB that we think might be useful for you, both in grant writing and of course in community engagement. We will conclude with an example that showcases a strong section 2 of the narrative, have a few discussion questions throughout the presentation, and we'll of course leave time for questions and answers.
Great, thank you, Rupal. So I'm just sort of going to quickly go over the MAC grants that we're going to see this year. So starting with community-wide assessment grants, these grants are for communities beginning to address their brownfields challenges, and the funding can be used to assess multiple sites within a municipality, start a brownfields inventory, or develop site-specific cleanup plans. They can also be used to conduct community engagement efforts related to local brownfield sites. So the maximum project period is 4 years. You see up to $500,000 per applicant, and 60 is the number of awards anticipated to be given out this year. Moving down to assessment coalitions, these grants include several different partners. They must be led by the state, a county government, or a regional planning commission. Coalitions can include between 2 to 4 communities or nonprofit organizations. And the idea is basically that these partners that maybe don't have the capacity to handle brownfields grants on their own can apply together and take care of multiple sites within their communities. So assessment coalition grants have a maximum project period of 5 years. More funding for this, we see up to $1,500,000 per applicant, but there's less awards, with 26 being the number of anticipated awards this year. Cleanup grants are more common. So cleanup grants are for when you know you have a brownfield site. Applicants can request up to $500,000 or up to $2 million or up to $5 million. So there's a few different types of awards for these cleanup grants, but you'll see that the awards for $500,000 are a lot more common than the ones for $2 million or $5 million. There's a total of 65 awards, but the vast majority, 40, are given to those requesting $500,000. And then the multi-purpose grants, maximum project period of 5 years. These, you'll see the number of anticipated awards is 20, so they're not as common as the cleanup grants or the community-wide assessment grants. Multi-purpose grants are best for communities that already have a strong foundation of community engagement. The funds can be used for both assessment and cleanup activities in a specific target area. The maximum project period is 5 years and up to $1 million per applicant. So yeah, if you have any other questions about the grants, we're happy to answer, but that was just sort of a brief overview for everybody.
So you might be asking, what is meaningful community engagement? So here I'm just going to talk about some fundamental ideas related to community engagement and some key points. The community engagement process really provides a valuable setting for discussing how brownfields assessment, cleanup, and revitalization can contribute to creating safe and secure neighborhoods for current and future residents. Some fundamental ideas in community engagement are mutual decision-making, accessibility, inclusivity. In practice, this looks like the celebration of diverse voices and lived experiences, public access to important information and resources, and community members being included and welcomed into spaces where decisions are being made. Meaningful community engagement is also having open conversations, particularly around community concerns and social barriers. Building trust can obviously be a challenge when working with underserved communities, which is why it's important to know your community's history and, when possible, enlist the help of what we call community liaisons. Community liaisons can be local citizens or organizations that truly know and care about their community, have connection with their fellow residents, and want to help spread the word about brownfields redevelopment projects. And they can also even relieve the anxiety that some community members might have about brownfields redevelopment. Community liaisons can help in creating a shared vision. Creating a shared vision among diverse residents is an important step to ensuring there is a seat at the table for everyone, and that your development project will support the needs and goals of your entire community. Environmental justice communities must be at the forefront of our discussions on keeping residents involved and engaged. EJ communities are disproportionately impacted by environmental hazards, including brownfields, and have been historically left out of important the decision-making process. Empowering residents in these communities is crucial to meaningful community engagement. It is important to acknowledge that community engagement will look different in each community, especially depending on where you are in the brownfields redevelopment process. Despite these differences, the core principles and main ideas of meaningful community engagement remain the same, and any community can use them as a foundation to get started. So, sorry, let me go to this. So now we'd like to ask you the question on the slide. What does meaningful community engagement look like in your community in terms of preparing for brownfields grants? And you could either raise your hand or just, there's not a lot of us on, so I think we could just kind of start chatting about this if you're comfortable doing so. Anybody have any experience with community engagement in their communities that you might want to discuss? Oh, Jill, thank you.
Um, y- so in our community, I think there's a lot of fear. They want to do something with those sites, but the fear or resistance of what that looks like, and language, sometimes framing language around projects is crucial. That's been my experience.
That's great, Jill. Can you talk about a little bit more about the language and framing the language? Curious.
So affordable housing, that word affordable is a trigger word sometimes because there's a lot of misunderstanding of what it means. We all live in affordable housing because we have a roof over our heads. But that looks differently depending on your social economics. But there's a group think that affordable housing means it's 100% subsidized, that there's absentee ownership. There's just a lot of negative stereotypes around affordable, that word affordable. And so when we look at brownfields, most in our community, those brownfield sites are mill sites that were the epicenters of commerce. And now they're the epicenters of decay. And so, you know, the infrastructure's there to support housing, that kind of thing. That's what they were meant to do. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen around what would it take to turn a mill into a housing district and what that would look like.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. In our framework, which we'll be discussing a little later, we do talk about the education piece quite a bit because we think it's critically important. Most people don't know what a brownfield is, and so that's key to start there. Anybody else? Okay.
Christine has her hand up.
Oh, great. Thank you. Why can't I see everybody's? Christine, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi. I just would add too, a lot of times communities already have their planned reuse. And they fail to ask the community what they want to see or realize what the community wants or what that site could possibly be. And it's very frustrating when the community, the people that are living next door to these sites don't have a say, or because they're renters, they're not notified of the meetings, or because they're working 3 full-time jobs. These meetings all take place at times that nobody can make. And for me, as a brownfields project officer, that's very frustrating to me. And we've gone on some situations where we actually knock on the doors and say, this is what the plan is, but what do you want to see and what do you need? And, that's the only thing that really stands out to me.
Thank you, Christine, for that important point. Katie will be talking a little bit later about the narrative and how making sure that when you're addressing these populations that you're talking about that may not be able to attend the meetings because they're far from where they live, or what kinds of activities or what kinds of engagement activities are important to engage various populations in your community. So how to write about that in your narrative section in the grant. Katie will discuss that. But I think you're absolutely right. I think that does happen more often than we'd like to think. And, and I think that we are charged now to really be specific about how we're going to engage these populations.
This is Phil Duffy. Our community's experience in community engagement has been in other grant programs like community development block grants. We tend to have kind of 2 kinds of meetings, one of which would be open-ended, like when we're talking about our community development strategy, where we go and ask people what they want, and another kind where we're already developed a project. Typically with CDBG projects, for instance, if we're doing an infrastructure program, we'll have meetings at 75% design with residents in the affected area and get their input on the project, document it and submit it, make any changes to the drawings that are suggested and supportable, and include that with our grant application. We tend to work in public meetings. We'll often go out to the site and have the meeting on the street. In our instance, our brownfield is under an existing AUL, which prohibits a range of uses. So it's a far more targeted use. But that's how we've done community engagement in connection with other grant programs and with reference to community planning in general.
That sounds great, Phil. Thank you for sharing. Okay, well, we're going to move forward. We have a couple of other discussion questions, and so we want to make sure we get to all of it. Okay. So as you can see right here, this is through our work at UConn tab. We've been able to identify some key principles, some that Phil just talked about, of community engagement. These include using plain language, information sharing and transparency, active and empathetic listening, building trust and power within communities, and meeting people where they are. And I really appreciate what you just said, going to the actual site and holding the meetings there. And authentic connections and partnerships. Plain language is designed to make sure that writing or speaking can be easily and clearly understood by any audience. In the world of brownfields, as we all know, there is a lot of convoluted language and acronyms that can be difficult to wrap our heads around. So using plain language is important in any community engagement efforts. Information sharing and transparency refers to accessibility and making sure that resources and materials are available to the general public. And it's especially helpful when information is available in plain language as well as different languages spoken throughout your community. Active empathetic listening is key to opening up a dialogue and creating safe space where residents can make their voices heard. Meeting people where they are and working with them instead of for them or on behalf of them is how we create authentic connections and participation. We can use those authentic connections and partnerships to build trust and power in communities, which lies at the heart of this work. These principles all work interdependently to create meaningful community engagement, and you could put them into practice using the framework on the next slide. Right. I think, okay. So UConn TAB recently developed what we call the SEEDS framework to lay the foundation for meaningful community engagement. First, we want to identify the key community stakeholders through a stakeholder analysis. Finding diverse stakeholders that truly represent your community will give you a strong start to community engagement. And you can use TAB's stakeholder analysis tool to help you do this. We will show you an example of this later in the presentation. The next phase of the framework is educate, where communities can utilize our resources to spread knowledge on brownfields and local redevelopment projects. Our Brownfields 101 video is 5 minutes long in plain language, and it gives a great description of brownfields and the redevelopment process. The Brownfields 101, especially done as a training, can also be tailored to your community. Empowerment includes community liaisons and community champions to help reach more people throughout the community and utilize their existing connections and knowledge to share information and resources. You could also use something called train the trainer methods that can train a wider audience on Brownfields 101 or other educational resources you may use with your community. And then, of course, dissemination is key, and it's the next phase of our framework. During this phase, we want to share lessons learned and key takeaways with the wider community in different neighborhoods and sectors, and make sure that resources and information are accessible and understood to everyone. UConn TAB's community pages, which are customized for each community we work with, and serve as a landing page for all project updates, can be really helpful during this process. We also encourage communities to work with their local libraries and other various community settings, such as senior centers, community centers, to disseminate resources and information. And finally, sustainable outreach will help us determine an approach to community engagement that works for the community and will last beyond all phases. Your community engagement work can and should continue past brownfields redevelopment. And at TAB, we want to make sure that each community we work with is equipped to keep practicing meaningful, sustainable community engagement. And we help communities do this by developing a comprehensive long-term community engagement plan. And so this is with communities that we work with specifically. Katie? Okay, I don't know if Katie's on. But section 2A and
Sorry, I'm
2B
here. I'm
oh,
sorry. I didn't
okay.
realize I was muted. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, and if everyone else can also mute their mics just because there's a few of us on here and I know background noises. I have some too. So but yeah, so switching gears to section 2 of the narrative, these are really your main focal points for identifying community engagement within the grant application. So we have section 2A, which is community need, and section 2B, which is community engagement. And these sections are going to look the same regardless of whichever grant you're applying for. So it's really important to feel comfortable discussing these topics. For section 2A, your goal is to use software like EJ Screen to get some concrete data and demonstrate that there is a real need for support in your community, a real need for funding in your community, and very real threats to sensitive populations. Sensitive populations usually refer to people of color, low income populations, populations with low educational attainment, limited English speakers, adults, older adults, so 65 and older, or children under 5. And then section 2B focuses on community engagement. So how you're going to get residents involved, what your partners will look like, what their role will be, and most importantly, how you will intentionally reach the sensitive populations that were mentioned in section 2A. People lose points here a lot because they'll talk about these vulnerable and underserved populations within their community and then in section 2A and then not mention them or not bring them into their community engagement plans in section 2B. So it's really important to keep these sections connected and make sure that everyone is included. So project involvement and project roles. In community engagement, partnerships are key. And when we say partnerships, we mean connections between two programs or agencies, organizations, community members. And these partnerships they're mutually beneficial, they are valued, they're supportive, they practice open communication. Brownfields redevelopment is not work that can be done alone. So its impacts are community-wide and the entire community should be informed and included at all times. And this can be done through building meaningful partnerships. And then on the next slide, we're going to go over some project partners and project partner roles. But before that, this table is a part of section 2B.
I'm actually in.
And so you'll see you have the list of stakeholders that you want to include, and then contact information for each stakeholder and what their role is and how they will specifically be involved in the project. And these partners in this table really need to include sensitive populations or groups that represent the sensitive populations that you mentioned in section 2A. We don't want to make the mistake of making every single stakeholder on this list a town official or a developer. Diverse voices and people and organizations
I thought it wasn't
that
a
are
Zoom
representative of their communities are really important. And again, I'm
based
so sorry.
meeting.
I just want to
WebEx,
remind
the other
everyone to
platform.
mute themselves because I think we're good. I'm sorry about that. There's just some background noise. Okay, so moving on to examples of project partners and project partner roles. I won't go through all of these, but I just want to bring our attention to some community partners that are really important in terms of community engagement. So we want to look at neighborhood associations, affordable housing organizations, health organizations, education institutions and schools. Cultural organizations are always really important. Churches can help reach people, and social service providers, as well as other community organizations that have strong community ties, are always a great way to go. And then, so for examples of project partner roles, again, I won't go through all of them, but I just want to mention that it is really helpful to find a partner with strong ties to the community, as I said, specifically any sensitive populations within your community, and having them serve as a community liaison, as Rupal discussed, and having them sort of take the lead on community engagement efforts. and outreach efforts can make a huge difference. And we will see, we'll look at an example that showcases that a bit later in the presentation. So this is a tool that we've developed at UConn Tab called a stakeholder analysis. So this basically helps communities examine who has the most power, influence within their community, who has the most interest in their redevelopment project, and it also goes over some specific strategies for different kinds of stakeholders, for keeping stakeholders engaged and making sure, as I said, that your partners are diverse and representative of everybody in your community. So all the resources that we show in this presentation will be on our website very soon. That's a work in progress. But if you want access, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to send them over. And like I said, they will be on our website very soon. And so this last part of section 2B, incorporating community engagement, we just wanted to include some strategies that you can practice and include on the grant for incorporating community input. And again, just preface to all of this, you're going to want to talk about this and think about this with the goal of including community members you don't usually hear from, those sensitive populations you mentioned in 2A. And focus groups and listening sessions can be a great way to do that. They're really impactful tools, and UConn Tab has some resources on how to learn more about these activities and get started with them. If anyone's interested, we're happy to share. So social media and Tab's community pages are always a good way to go. You know, we find that town Facebook pages tend to have a lot of traction, lots of community members and citizens just talking about matters throughout their town or city. And Tab's community pages, which Rupal mentioned a little bit about, this is one of our community engagement services that we offer. It is free. We always like to mention all of our services are free. And we create a password protected page on our website that basically serves as a hub or a landing page for any updates or materials that you have pertaining to the site. So it's a great way to keep people informed in a way that's accessible. And we also understand that not everyone's super comfortable with technology. So, you know, suggestion boxes throughout town can be better for folks that maybe don't want to go online as much. And then, you know, sort of tying into that point, meeting people where they are. So, you know, libraries, churches, parks, community events, local restaurants and schools. This will look different in every community, but just, I think somebody mentioned, I think it was Phil, just, you know, going to the site, going where people naturally sort of congregate in the community is a great way to get people involved. And then finally, public meetings. Hosting public meetings is not only an important way to reach people, but it is required if you're applying for a cleanup grant, which we will get into in just a little bit. Rupal, did you want to do this question?
Yeah. So since we're discussing public meetings, we're curious to know if your community has ever hosted a public meeting and if they've been successful, and why or why have they not? Feel free to, I don't see any hands up unless I'm missing something.
I'm sorry, Rupal, could you repeat that question?
Sure. So has your community ever hosted public meetings? Have they been successful? Why or why not?
Well, this is Phil. I'll start. We've hosted dozens, if not hundreds, of public meetings for a wide range of projects or purposes. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. But when we're dealing with a project, site-specific project, as it would be in this instance, we actually go door to door with flyers, inviting people to the meeting to let them know that the invitation is more than just a notice on the website. Really, their success depends on how much they get excited about the project. You know, sometimes sidewalks are exciting, sometimes they're really boring. So it really depends. It really depends on the project. We've had them for, in my time, I've been on the job for 12 years, and yeah, we've probably had close to 100 public meetings on downtown projects, infrastructure projects, senior center projects, all the way down the line.
So I wonder if, I'm sure you've done certain things to make projects seem more exciting or get people more excited. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, sometimes it depends on, gosh, what makes a project exciting? What makes a project exciting is an exciting project. I'll give you an example of, our senior center meetings were fantastic. Our downtown streetscape improvements projects and even the downtown lighting meetings were fantastic. When we had business assistance meetings during COVID, those were terribly boring in spite of the fact that it was vital information that was being conveyed. So I actually don't, I think it really depends on the project.
Hmm. Thank you.
I guess if you're hosting the meeting, if you can convey enthusiasm about the proposed project, that helps too.
Yeah, definitely. Anybody else? All right. Well, if we have time, we could talk about it more if you think of something, but we'll move forward. Unless I'm missing someone. No? Okay.
Yeah, I think it looks good. But we'll be talking about public meetings, so if anyone has anything they want to add, feel free.
I would say just one more thing. The best projects tend to involve citizen input, not advocacy group input.
Yes, we always encourage citizen input. And while we're just on the topic of public meetings, the UConn tab has this tool, a community meeting checklist that helps basically just kind of provides a framework for hosting a successful community meeting. You go through the phases of preparing for it, actually hosting it and implementing your strategy, and then following up with any participants and evaluating your progress with the meeting. So again, we're happy to share any of these resources. We hope that they'll be able to provide some help in your community engagement process. So kind of moving on to some more community engagement strategies for specific grants. We'll start with community-wide assessment grants. So for this advisory committee, the first bullet point, for anyone who doesn't know, when someone is applying for an assessment grant, they need to include 3 different sites on the grant that basically create the best narrative for their community. But the funding will actually cover assessment activities for more than just the 3 sites. So an advisory committee will meet and essentially discuss what other sites they think could use the extra funding. So participating on this advisory committee meeting is a great way to get involved and meet different stakeholders, and just create some energy and excitement for Brownfield's assessment. And so moving down the list, developing a vision, communicating plans, soliciting interest and building interest, like Phil mentioned, for redevelopment projects, helping disseminate materials. These are all actions that will bring your community closer to applying for a cleanup grant and put you in a really great position for success when the time to apply comes. These practices, give you an advantage, but bigger picture, they also just help build a really strong foundation for community engagement, which will benefit your community in the long run and in Brownfield's redevelopment and beyond that as well. And then, like we've been saying, UConn tab has a lot of tools and resources that we can help to, do a lot of these things. We can help disseminate materials. We can help build interest and energy around projects. We can help communicate plans to your constituents, and we can help in creating a shared community vision as well. So we're happy to provide any support for community engagement that you may be looking for. So moving on to cleanup grants, community engagement in cleanup grants is extremely important. Your community members, and specifically your sensitive and impacted populations, need to be included and welcomed into the decision-making process. So cleanups of brownfield sites are when site reuse visions really come into play, and these visions should be a collaborative process where lots of different voices and perspectives are being brought to the table. And remember, your redevelopment project should benefit your sensitive populations and improve overall quality of life for everyone. That's always our goal. And the cleanup process involves a lot of different decisions. As we mentioned before, decision making can be a shared, inclusive, transparent process. So involving and engaging community members in key decisions not only helps the community, but it also ensures that unexpected concerns don't come up later on. And again, similar to what we mentioned on the last slide, you want to practice open communication with residents and make sure that they have access to any materials or information that they need, especially in plain language. And it's a bit higher stakes in the cleanup grants versus the assessment grants, because communities are really able to see, hear, and feel the changes that are happening within their community. So getting people involved at this point is really a must. Which is why cleanup grant recipients are required to hold a public meeting and notify the public of that meeting at least 14 calendar days prior to submitting a grant application. So these specific guidelines haven't come out yet, but grants are usually due mid-November, and public meetings must be held, as I said, at least 14 public meetings must be held prior to the submission of the grant application, but a community notification of the public meeting must go out at least 14 calendar days prior to submitting the grant application. The community notification must also state that a copy of the grant application is available for public review and comment. It must list where the grant is located, whether that's online or in person in the community somewhere, and it must provide instructions on how people can comment on the grant. So you really want to have all of these details settled, at least 14 calendar days prior to whenever you're submitting your grant, but ideally before then, so you're not in a rush to do all of this. And to wrap up this section, and before we get into our example, these are just some sort of key elements and takeaways for getting full points on on section 2 of the narrative, the community engagement section. So you always want to emphasize diverse, representative partners and a desire to make communities more livable and sustainable for the sensitive populations that you mentioned in section 2A. Section 2A and Section 2B, these sections are supposed to work together and tie into one another. And when people address them separately and don't include the sensitive groups in 2A in the community engagement section, 2B, you're going to lose points. And, we are discussing these topics in the context of grants, but it's obviously a much deeper and more complex issue than losing points. The sensitive populations that you write about have most likely been underserved, underrepresented, and they need support, they need resources, they need investment, and that's the big picture here. That's what's most important, and it's what we hope to accomplish with Brownfields Grants funding. But just moving down the list here, you want to hone in on project partners and their role, which you're going to do in the table in section 2B. So just kind of answering who is each partner and how will they contribute to the overall goals of the community through overall goals and vision of the community when it comes to the Brownfields redevelopment project. And you want to create an inclusive community engagement plan. Thankfully, many communities have sort of returned to some sense of normalcy since COVID-19, but it's absolutely still something important to consider. And it did open a bigger dialogue in terms of accessibility. So, we always want to make community engagement efforts accessible, whether that's providing childcare or making community meetings child-friendly. providing a virtual option for those who aren't able to make events in person, being aware of different work schedules, like somebody mentioned, different transportation needs when it comes to public meetings and events. So just keeping all those things in mind and trying to make these efforts
Oh,
successful
yeah,
for
I'm
everyone.
yeah, my video's
Sorry, we're
on.
still hearing some background noise. I think there's maybe one or two people that don't have their mute on, so please, if you don't mind doing that.
Thank you, Rupal. I'm sorry about that. I hope everyone can hear me okay. And then the big takeaway here is just that the EPA wants to
Sounds like
see.
I really learned much new on this, but I had at least some show that if I'm doing.
Oh no! I hope
what
everyone
we're
can hear
doing
me
is
okay.
doing
Because
good.
I'm not sure that everybody's muted, so I am sorry if people are having trouble hearing me. But the big takeaway here is that the EPA wants to see meaningful, inclusive community engagement, and they want to know that grant applicants are really dedicated to making their communities safer and healthier for everybody. So moving on to our example of a successful section 2 of the narrative, we're looking at New London, Connecticut. New London, Connecticut had a very successful grant application, and one of the strongest points was the table included in section 2B, the community engagement section. So you'll see here some of their partners that they listed. Obviously, we're going to blur out the contact information, but you can see the specific involvement in the project and the roles that all of these partners played. And what we really want to point out here is that New London had a specific designated community partner for community engagement work, and that served as a community liaison. And, you know, they mentioned that the ties and the connections that this organization has to the New London community are very strong. They do have roots in advocacy and sustainability. They have lots of connections to lots of different groups throughout the community, and they work hard to support underserved and sensitive populations in New London. So their role as community liaison was crucial in helping reach people in ways that were inclusive, accessible, and successful. And I'm sorry if folks can't hear me. If anyone has questions on anything, feel free to contact me after, and the slides will be available. This will be recorded, so hopefully everybody's getting some clarity. And then just some other partners I wanted to point out here. The hospital, the Lawrence and Memorial Hospital, provided input on public health, and they helped with outreach. Fresh New London is a community organization that inspired a lot of youth involvement, and you know, they also help with community engagement. So this is really a great example of diverse partnerships and what they can offer to brownfields redevelopment projects, and what it looks like to practice meaningful, inclusive community engagement. I think we have one. Yeah.
Katie, one quick question. Who was the lead applicant on that project? Was it a redevelopment authority or was it the city?
I believe it was the city of New London. Let me get back to you on that, Phil, because I don't want to say something that's not true, but I'm pretty positive that it was the city of New London.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Oops. Okay. Looks like we have time for this last discussion question.
Yeah, just a last discussion question. Since, you know, both Katie and I have been talking, especially Katie, about the importance of underrepresented populations, we'd like to better understand, are there any particular considerations, or are there any underserved groups in your community? And how do you believe you can best engage them and ensure that this process is inclusive for everyone?
I like what Phil said about taking it to the direct neighbors. And I think childcare sometimes becomes a barrier of participation. So if there's a way that you know, that would be welcome to bring children and have some sort of structure for someone to look after the kids. whether it's at a public library and they have the program going on or something, you know, simultaneously. I do think that's a barrier.
Yeah, we've seen various things related to childcare. As Jill mentioned, there's a local library and there's programming. If there's a childcare provider out on site, we see this issue being sometimes larger in certain community sectors versus others, certain neighborhoods versus others. And so having that community liaison can really be important in identifying some of the barriers to engagement in various neighborhoods and how best to address those. And oh, Christine?
Yeah, I've seen a few different scenarios that work depending on the community. And you said it earlier, it's meet them where they're at. So a lot of times communities are already having scheduled events, and those are the people that you want to reach out to, especially if it's maybe you're doing a downtown and there's going to be a trunk or treat. And I'm just throwing this out there. But I've seen the contractors and the city folks set up like just some information tables at these events, and then maybe some flip charts where they say, this is the site, it obviously it can't be a school, so let's not go there, but what do you want to see in your neighborhood? And it's really informative. Like, I know I'm thinking out loud, but in Chicopee, Mass, everybody decided they need a grocery store. So it's a done deal. The city knows we need to put a grocery store here because that's what, people are lacking and things like that. So I think it depends on the community, but I would say meet them where they're at. Another situation are, moms, they put their child on the school bus, and they found in one community, they found one mom that was willing to open up her home and have coffee, and then just have like an hour where all these moms got together. The kids were in school, they were all taken care of, and just talk to them. Then they feel like a part of the community.
Love it.
So yeah, there was that. And then, there's just plenty of situations that it depends on your group, but I would say just make sure that it's the people that are directly affected by these brownfields that you're engaging, and not the people on the other side of town. Because as a reviewer, that's the first thing that we look at. Like, why are you engaging the Chamber of Commerce when you know you need a park? So I guess that's just something I would throw out there.
Great. Thank you for that, Christine. Great ideas.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Thank you so much. Did anyone else want to add anything, or should we?
I have a kind of a follow-up question with this, just because it helps really thinking about it as we're talking. And when you have engaged these populations and done these kinds of events, what have been some of the outcomes of that? And Christine, maybe you might have some input, or Phil or Jill or anybody else.
I think the outcomes are the city at that point. Once you pull these people together and you have, people putting on paper what they'd like to see, it's almost difficult for the city to then go and bring their planned project in there. Like, it could be that you have an Hispanic community and they play dominoes. Like, I've seen this happen, and we were doing an area-wide plan and the people wanted domino tables. So, the city then says, okay, we're going to build this park, but we're going to incorporate domino tables so that even the elderly will come to this park. It's not just going to be soccer fields. We're going to get every generation using this park. Senior centers, I think Phil mentioned it, you gotta, when you meet with the seniors, they're not going to come to a meeting at 6:30 at night, or they're not going to log on to their computer and do a Zoom. Well, maybe now they will, but you have to go when they're at the senior center and just say that, you know, make people feel inclusive, and you'll see how it can help drive your project. But that's just my thought.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
This is Phil. I think the outcome has been better projects. Just on the subject of outreach, as Christine was speaking, we do get out of the office and we do get out of town hall because it's just works better. We'll go to the senior center on just before bingo. You know, we have a local social service agency, and we'll have one meeting with the staff and then another meeting at a mealtime. We know we're going to get a good number of people. When I say better projects, though, you know, when we have meetings during design development, not at the beginning, when it's really best to be guided by a lot of the problems are technical that you're solving. So we have the, you know, our design professionals take a pass at it, but at about 75%, we'll bring it to the immediate abutters, and we've gotten input and modified projects. They make them better projects because people feel an attachment to them. You know, we build things in our communities. You know, we build roads and sidewalks and streetlights and senior centers and parks and open space. But what we're really doing is trying to inculcate and strengthen people's sense of identification with place and their pride in place. And when they are a bigger part of the project, that's a better outcome. We just last year did a MVP funded program on a regional project with the town of Bolton, demographically very different than Clinton, on forestry and grasslands management, green space management, and we did specific outreach trying to target you know, historically disadvantaged populations, which is kind of a new term in community development. It's only in the last 5 years that you started to see it come into commonplace. While the project is so new, we don't know what the implementation is going to look like. We were surprised that at the wrap-up event, we had dozens of people who haven't normally shown up at these events show up and, you know, be part of it. You know, be part of understanding what was being recommended and having hot dogs and that kind of stuff. So it makes a better project because it draws people more into their community. And again, pride and pride of place is what we're really trying to accomplish.
I love it. I'm going to use it. Pride and pride of place. Wonderful.
Well,
So I think
just everything else comes and goes. But that's, you know, when people have an identification with place, it can, you know, the idea of the place can be sustained over time.
Yep, absolutely. So we have a few minutes for questions. So feel free.
Yeah.
Katie's quite the expert on these different grants now, the MAC grants. So
Yeah, we just want to, you know, thank everybody for coming. This is our contact information. If you want to ask any specific questions or ask for clarity on anything we discussed, ask for any resources, you can reach out to either of us or just the general UConn tab email, whichever you prefer. But yeah, we'll open it up to questions, and thank you so much again for coming.
it looks like Stephanie has her hand up.
Yes, I have a question. And I'm really glad that Christine mentioned, you know, when you have a project that the town, like the town leadership kind of has a plan for what this redevelopment site would be. And then I'm really glad that Phil kind of mentioned, you know, that sense of place, because it reminds me, and I want to know if I should include this in the application packet. We just completed a master plan update that had a lot of public engagement over the course of, you know, at least a year and a half. And some of the things that came out of it was, you know, that the town, our town doesn't really have like a core downtown. And so, and that was something that they wanted to kind of develop on the next 10 years. Then last fall, a property in this downtown core area, where at least where our commercial area is, came up for sale, which is the brownfield site. And then, so the town has kind of been thinking that that would be a great place to relocate our town hall, police and fire, to kind of give it like this sense of, grounding, because it's kind of on two different spaces where our town hall and everything's kind of spread out. So I just was wondering, how I can utilize that kind of information in this application, and while also asking for additional feedback and recommendations from the town, even though it seems that there's kind of a path forward that folks want.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Stephanie. I'm sorry if you mentioned this, which grant are you applying for?
The cleanup grant.
The cleanup grant. And just for, again, some just clarity on your question, and you want to basically include the information about your downtown or your lack of downtown.
Yeah, and I want to kind of maybe reference all the stakeholder engagement that had occurred recently. It wasn't like it was 10 years ago,
Oh,
but
yeah.
recently through the master plan update, perhaps reference like the town meeting vote that was approved to, go ahead and purchase this property. And do you think that that's beneficial to add to this kind of application?
I think definitely mentioning that you have strong roots in community engagement and involvement, and that you have strategies that have worked in the past, can definitely be a great thing to mention on the application, because the EPA really wants to know that communities are going to follow through with these efforts and actually try to get people involved. So the fact that you have already done so in the past in your community, if you have room for it, I would say definitely include it.
Great.
But yeah, but if you want to like talk more specifically about that, like please feel free to email us or reach out. We're happy to assist.
We're happy to look over something, or yeah, just as Katie said, I think it would be beneficial to reach out to us, because there's probably a lot there, and specifically what you want to add. It sounds like all of it is great information, but we do know there's limited room, so please feel free to reach out to us.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Let's see, where are we for time? Oh, we're at 1. If anyone has any other questions, we might have time for one more, but if not, like we've said, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to chat at any time, or answer any other questions we didn't have time for today.
And we do encourage you, as Katie mentioned, you can reach out to us individually, but using the TAB program website, email sometimes is the best way to reach us, so it gets to the right people, because there's a group of us and we want to make sure, we have different kinds of expertise. And so it might make the most sense to use that email, and we'll all see it. So we'll reach out to you as soon as possible. But if anybody has a burning question, a few minutes over is not a big deal. Okay.
All right. Thank you,
Thank you,
Stephanie.
Stephanie.
Thank you, Jill. Yeah, thank you, everybody. And that was a great point, Rupal. The UConn tab email is, ideally the first point of contact. So
Okay.
Appreciate you guys, and we
Alright.
appreciate your input, and we hope to
Yeah.
work with each of you.
Yeah, thank you for all the great discussion today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rupal, do you want to go ahead and stop the recording?